Midday in Dakar and 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and across the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. The Senegalese government declares the release of 344 political prisoners amid President Sall's call for dialogue.
Civil society groups calling for the release of Ousmane Sonko. Yes, it is their right to do so, but as I said, we'll assess each case on its merit and see that it's reserved for all these appeals.
Guinean government cabinet dissolution sparks nationwide debate on future leadership approach. A section of Ghanaians applaud the Electoral Commission's reverse decision to use indelible ink for December 2024 polls.
Technically and practically, it is impossible, beyond logic, to want to undertake private elections with indelible ink and then for public elections remove indelible ink in the name of budget when the Electoral Commission is not the entity that is in charge of budgeting.
And the Nigeria Customs Service said to distribute all seized food items to Nigerians after a health certification process as prices of food items continue to rise. Stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Many thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, and Liberia. I'm Augustine Coley, and on this news broadcast with me, I'm Abdullahi Hassan, and on this news broadcast with me is my colleague, Augustine Coley. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Abdullahi. It's a pleasure.
Good to have you.
As well.
Very well. The midday edition of Newslink opens in Senegal with the government's announced release of over 344 political prisoners. These detainees began regaining their freedom on February 15, 2024 as part of the political discussions initiated by President Macky Sall. Addressing a press conference on Tuesday, the Senegalese Minister of Justice, Aissata Tall Sall, clarified the situations of opposition politicians Ousmane Sonko and Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The minister emphasized that the government's decision to grant provisional release is based on the evaluation of individual cases, considering objective criteria rather than social or political status. Tawfiq Abdel Nasser reports.
The recent release of prisoners has sparked concerns about the criteria for their freedom. Some Senegalese citizens, including civil society groups, are urging the release of Ousmane Sonko. In response to WADR's question about Ousmane Sonko's potential release, Justice Minister Aissata Tall Sall stated that the release are made based on assessments.
La société civile appelle à la libération de Ousmane Sonko.
Civil society groups calling for the release of Ousmane Sonko. Yes, it is their right to do so, just as it should have called for the release of everyone. But as I said, we'll assess each case on its merit and see that it's reserved for all these appeals. And even for those for which there is no appeal, because they are nominees. And we'll deal with the cases objectively. As I said, without any bias, but obviously without the emergence of any arbitrariness.
Aissata Tall Sall also clarified the reasons behind the absence of a trial for Bassirou Diomaye Faye.
What decision has been taken for Bassirou Diomaye Faye? It is the same as the others. As I said, being a candidate is not a condition for provisional release. On the other hand, if we realize today that the conditions have been met for him to be granted provisional release, like all the others, we'll act accordingly.
Following the Constitutional Council's annulment of the December 15 election date, there are questions about the new date's timing about President Macky Sall's term. The Justice Minister highlighted the government's agenda sequence.
As far as President Sall is concerned, as I said, he has acted on the board's decision. And in accepting the board's decision as to when the election will take place, as I've said before and I'll say it again, he called for a dialogue to perhaps get the best assessment. Once he has the assessment, as soon as possible, the presidential election will take place.
Tawfiq Abdel Nasser filed that report.
Meanwhile, Senegal's Constitutional Council, days nearly a week after its ruling on the delayed presidential election, published a revised candidate list. While no major changes were made to the initial list, Rose Wardini's withdrawal from the race due to her dual nationality reduced the number of candidates from 20 to 19. In the meantime, negotiations and consultations for the elections are ongoing. Recall, President Macky Sall had assured the country and international community of strongly abiding by the Council's ruling of conducting the polls as soon as possible, a verdict that cancelled Sall's decree convening the electorates and the bill passed by lawmakers for elections to be held on December 15. Unlike any other electoral season in Senegal's history, Sall's postponement of the elections plunged the country into a spiral of political instability and social unrest characterized by the deadly confrontations, arrests, and deaths.
Meanwhile, as soon as the election, a new political coalition in a letter to President Sall proposed March 3rd for holding of the presidential election. The message was transmitted on Tuesday, but the presidency is yet to officially respond. Elsewhere in Guinea, circumstances surrounding the cabinet dissolution continue to generate reactions and debate across the country. For the socio-political class, this move is not unexpected, considering the extent of the socio-economic crisis that has gripped the country. As citizens contemplate the way forward for the remaining transition period, there is a split among the populace regarding whether to form a government of national unity or opt for a government of technocrats. Here's Oge Berika with this report filed in by WADR's Cheno Alpha Ibrahim Balde in Conakry.
After the government's dissolution on Tuesday, the Secretary General convened cabinet meetings with executives to outline the protocols to be followed until a new government is established. The day following the government's dissolution, the president of the Guinean Civil Forum, Ibrahima Balaya Diallo, asserted that the ruling military should reassess their governance of the country. Edward Sotomo, from the Anad coalition led by opposition figure Selu Dalin Diallo, urges the transitional president to utilize this opportunity to initiate genuine political dialogue. In the aftermath of the government's dissolution, citizens in Conakry expressed varying opinions on the composition of the new government for the ongoing transition. On Tuesday, all interim heads of ministerial departments convened with the Secretary General at the presidency.
A report by WADR's Cheno Alpha Ibrahim Balde in Conakry and voiced in our studios by Oge Berika.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
In Mali, the chairman of the steering committee for the Inter-Malian Dialogue for Peace and National Reconciliation engaged the media on Tuesday. The former Prime Minister, Ousmane Issoufou Magal, gave explanations on the process of this dialogue to better inform the population. However, he called on the armed terrorist groups to lay down their arms and surrender to the law. David Vincent has more in this report by WADR's Aliyu Cham in Bamako.
This meeting between the chairman of the steering committee of the Inter-Malian Dialogue and the press provided more details on the consultations announced between Malians. According to Ousmane Issoufou Maïga, the main aim of this dialogue is to find a solution to the security crisis that has gripped the country for a decade.
The
Malians are in demand of this Inter-Malian dialogue. It has been decided by the highest authorities that for once we must change the system. We must demand that all Malians gathered around the incentives, the search for peace, national reconciliation, living together, and social cohesion. The coexistence of all these words is not new in our country.
Ousmane Issoufou Maïga took the opportunity to call on the leaders of armed terrorist groups to lay down their arms.
We are told how to negotiate with the Asima, Yada Gali, Amadou Kufa. But where are they? There will be a dialogue everywhere in the country. Their parents will talk to others. They are Muslims, but those who took up arms against their country, will they have to drop their weapons, to exchange, to say why they took up arms? Why they do not want to drop their weapons, since they are Malians? They must answer to justice.
Initiated last December and subsequently inaugurated by the president of the transition, Colonel Assimi Goïta, the steering committee for this dialogue is now beginning its activities. It should be noted that the armed pro-independence groups in the north, who are members of the Permanent Strategic Framework, have already rejected this initiative.
A report by WADR's Aliyu Cham in Bamako and voiced in our studios by David Vincent.
Let's take you to Ghana, where the decision by the country's Electoral Commission EC to abandon its initial plan not to deploy the use of indelible ink in the December 2024 polls has been welcomed. This comes after the EC's initial plan to abandon the practice sparked criticism from the main opposition National Democratic Congress (NDC), Parliament, civil society organizations, and election observers. They warned that removing the ink could jeopardize the credibility of the elections. From Accra, Nadia Tete has more.
The Electoral Commission announced in December last year that the use of indelible ink, a semi-permanent dye traditionally applied to voters' fingers to signify the exercise of their franchise and prevent instances of double voting, was to be replaced. The Commission argued that the biometric system was robust enough to ensure that individuals did not vote more than once, a stance vehemently opposed by various interest groups, particularly the opposition NDC. However, the election arbiter reversed its decision after numerous concerns were raised about its implications. In response to the EC's U-turn, Mustafa Gbandi, the Deputy General Secretary of the NDC, argued the EC's initial position defied logic.
Technically and practically, it is impossible, beyond logic, for anyone to want to undertake private elections with indelible ink and then for public elections remove indelible ink in the name of budget when the Electoral Commission is not the entity that is in charge of budgeting.
According to a section of Ghanaians interviewed, the EC's reversal helps alleviate some of the tensions surrounding the upcoming elections.
Well, I think it's a call in the right direction because at the end of the day, there were too many nuances to that. It raised a lot of concerns and there were a lot of agitations looking at the timing and everything. So now it takes away any form of speculation about the integrity of the elections.
There's been times that although people object to some suggestions by the EC, they still try to take it to Parliament, and that is when it's eventually squashed. But for the EC to not even try to table it in the first place shows that probably in the best interest of the 2024 elections, the EC will listen to us more.
The EC has also abandoned its proposal to hold the elections in November 2024, opting instead to implement the changes for the 2028 polls. For WADR, Nadidi Teti, Accra.
Away from Ghana, Liberian President Joseph Boakai continues to face pressure and serious criticisms for failing to publicly declare his assets. During the 2023 political campaign, Boakai accused George Weah of refusing to make public his assets, promising to change the narrative if elected president of the republic. WADR's Darlington Porkwal in Monrovia reports.
Since independence in 1847, no president in Liberia has declared and made public their assets, a narrative Boakai vowed to change during his days as a main opposition figure. However, since his inauguration about a month ago, the Liberian leader has refused to make public his assets. He declared to the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, something that has angered these Liberians.
By now, we were even hoping to have seen or heard publication of the president's own assets that he declared. For us, that is fundamental.
In line with Part 10.1 of the National Code of Conduct, all public officials and employees of the government are mandated to declare their assets and liabilities before taking office and thereafter. Mr. Boakai and his vice president have miserably failed to pass this simple test of integrity.
At the same time, one of the lead campaigners of the Joseph Boakai presidential bid, Senator Darius Dillon, challenged the president to be honest to the country by making public his assets.
President Boakai declared his asset appropriately. He should publish. It's becoming belated, and the honorability to do it is losing steam. He should publish his asset. The vice president of Liberia should declare his asset and publish. We got to be really serious about this. The president should publish his asset. We can't be disarming ourselves of the argument. We can't be driven or allowed to be driven or other people drive the narrative. Those are things that don't require funding. It only says you're ready. Accountability, transparency.
Some supporters of the now main opposition, the Coalition for Democratic Change, are threatening a series of protests if the Liberian leader refuses to declare his assets. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Porpa in Monrovia.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal, and across the world on WADR.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Senegalese government declares the release of 344 political prisoners amid President Sall's call for dialogue. The Guinean government cabinet resolution sparks nationwide debate on future leadership approach. And a section of Ghanaians applaud the Electoral Commission's reversed decision to use indelible ink for the December 2024 polls.
Still ahead in the news, the Nigeria Customs Service set to distribute all seized food items to Nigerians after a health certification process as prices continue to rise. We also have the press review, guest interview, and sports update. Please stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
And as a reminder, we stream live on WADR.org and on Facebook, WADR English Service. The Nigeria Customs Service, NCS, says it is working to distribute some seized food items nationwide as the biting food crisis continues in the country. According to the Customs National Public Relations Officer, Abdullahi WADR, the food items will be distributed after they are certified fit for human consumption. Francis Boniface has won this report.
In a statement on Tuesday, the Nigerian Customs Service explained that it will facilitate the direct disposal of food items forfeited to the federal government in order to alleviate the hardships faced by Nigerians. The secondary purpose for the move is to improve access to essential food items amid the ever-rising food prices and soaring inflation. However, before the delivery to ordinary Nigerians nationwide through the customs equitable distribution in areas of operations, the items will be certified fit for consumption by relevant agencies and made available. The modalities for the disposal will be communicated through the NCS formations or commands nationwide with a firm commitment to transparency, fairness, and public safety, the statement reads. The Nigerian Customs Service described the development as efforts by the Comptroller General Bashir Dewale Adeniyi as advancing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's food security agenda, thereby fostering economic stability and prosperity. Grains including rice, millet, and maize seized from smugglers from illegal importation routes are those to be distributed. There is also no mention of the exact quantity of food items to be distributed, but the supply will assist poor Nigerians across the country lamenting the increased cost of living with recent protests in Niger, Kano, and Oyo states last week.
Francis Boniface reporting there.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Up next is a fill of major and minor headlines on the front pages of Gambia national dailies with WADR's Sangula Jungle in Banjul.
Hello and welcome to this press review coming to you from Banjul, and let's begin today's press review with the Fourier newspaper. And the lead story on the Fourier newspaper reads, Shakina murder, suspect will be prosecuted. And this is a lead story with regards to the mother of a British national called Sakina, who was found dead in a well in the outskirts of Banjul. And the police are saying that the suspect, who happens to be a non-Gambian, a Sierra Leonean national, to be specific, will be prosecuted according to the police. Ex-State House Chief Driver's diplomatic passport nears judgment. Let's take out the stories on the Point newspaper. For the Point newspaper, their lead story today reads, CJ hails dialogue as necessary. CJ is the Chief Justice of the Gambia, and that is Al-Hassan Bubakar Jallo, who was held the recent national dialogue organized by President Adama Barrow after inviting the politicians, then held a national dialogue including civil society, the youth, among others. Witness made over 20 calls while taking statement of alleged PIU suitor. That's according to the Defense Counsel Dabo, who is currently defending Usainu Bojang, who is alleged to have shot and killed 2 police officers. Now, let's move on to the final paper for today, and that is the Standard newspaper. The lead story on the Standard newspaper reads, "Police say most crimes committed by foreigners." Of course, this comes following the death of a British national, Sakina, who was killed by a Sierra Leonean national, and a recent attack also in Fajara, also led by a Sierra Leonean national. This has led to the police arguing that most crimes committed in the Gambia are carried out by non-Gambians. NPP reviewed KM Mayo. That's another story. Mustafa Dabo quits Malagan. Mustafa Dabo is the best investigative journalist in the Gambia. He's renowned and has won loads of awards because of his investigative work while working for Malagan. But it is reported that he has quit the famous investigative newspaper. And finally, police arrest woman for staging $500,000 robbery with the photo of ASP Bintanjai, the police spokesperson. I'm afraid we'll have to stop it here for now, and it's back to you in the studios.
Many thanks, Sankula Janko.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Well, our guest segment this afternoon is a focus on the release of hundreds of political prisoners by the state of Senegal since February 15 as part of efforts to calm the political atmosphere. This was revealed by the Minister of Justice, Aissata Tall Sall. Recall President Macky Sall called for a dialogue after chaos erupted following the announced elections postponement, which opposition political parties, CSOs, and international community condemned. Efforts to repair the damage caused made room for requests including the release of political prisoners, while the Constitutional Council's verdict requesting elections be held as soon as possible. Speaking to WADR, Amadou Kamara remarks on the efforts, but essentially the exclusion of opposition figures Ousmane Sonko and Bassirou Diomaye Faye from the list.
I think it is a good idea, even if many people today think that it's not normal to release some people accused of being terrorists. And what is also clear in her message is that even if she doesn't repeat the term political prisoner, but we seem that people who were arrested during the riots or during the protests were political prisoners.
How does the release of these political prisoners impact the postponed election?
Yes, maybe they have an argument for their campaign and they can use it as an argument for their campaign, like a kind of victimization. I think it is something positive for ex-Pastef, but something that can really hinder the advantage of the regime, meaning Benno Bokuyaka.
And now, Mr. Kamara, what is your opinion on the Justice Minister's explanation for not including the release of Ousmane Sonko and presidential candidate Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who are also in detention?
I think that she declared that if they follow the process, the roadmap, they could be free. But when she was speaking also, she was addressing to the international community and to Senegalese also, to the local community. And in that perspective that we can see that she tried to convince international community that we can go in a peaceful election. And I think that if Ousmane Sonko follow the process and Bassirou Diomaye Faye, they could be free in the coming days.
But are you concerned about the process and the criteria being set forth for their release like other detainees?
Yes, she declared that at this moment there are more than 250 electronic bracelets. For those who are ready to take it, they could be free. And as regarded Ousmane Sonko and Diomaye Faye, I think they are included in that fact. And if their lawyer decided to hand over judicial control, they could be free. And Bassirou Diomaye Faye, I think, could run the election, meaning to be the candidate of ex-Pastef.
Do you realize any political motive by the government's decision to continuously hold Diomaye Faye and Sonko in custody without trial?
No, I don't think there are any motivation. And President Macky Sall and his collaborators are all of that, and that's why they decided to free this prisoner. And I think that Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko will be included in that fact, meaning that they will be free.
Does President Macky Sall have the constitutional authority to await the completion of an assessment before giving go-ahead for the conduct of the presidential election?
Yes, I think at this moment he is meeting some political leaders to go to the dialogue. After the dialogue, President Macky Sall will declare publicly the day of the campaign and the day of the election. So I think he is not ready. At this moment, he is trying to discuss with all the stakeholders in order to take a good decision as to avoid a crisis institutional. The Constitutional Council decided to stop the power of President Macky Sall, telling him enough is enough and you should comply with the rule of law, meaning to organize election on time. And I think it is what President Macky Sall is trying to do.
That was Amadou Kamara, a political analyst there in Senegal.
And in the world of sports, Inter Milan defeated Atletico Madrid 1-0 in the UEFA Champions League on Tuesday night at San Siro. Marko Arnautovic scored the only goal of the match 11 minutes before the final whistle. In the other UEFA Champions League match on Tuesday night, PSV were held to a 1-1 draw by Borussia Dortmund. Donetsk Malen's first half goal was cancelled by Luke de Jong's second half penalty. Meanwhile, Nigerian international Victor Osimhen will hope to lead his Napoli side to victory when they take on Barcelona on the Champions League tonight.
Before we round up, Augustine, I know I didn't see you necessarily support Nigeria during the AFCON games in Cote d'Ivoire, but with Osimhen's performance there, do you see him increase his market value?
Certainly, being the finalist, I think it will increase its market value as compared to what we have in Senegal here as our own player, and of course the Egyptian Mohamed Salah. So among the three of them, he being a finalist, it will certainly increase its market value.
So do we see a possibility of a quick transfer?
It depends on his performance again, but there have been clubs behind him. Napoli is struggling in the Italian Serie A currently. So if he performs well, but ensuring that his team reaches the top, then he could just be tipped to leave.
I'm proud of you. At least you followed.
Thank you. And that's how we end this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudo Juf for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. I am Augustine Cully.
And I'm Abdullah Hassan. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is the rebroadcast of our flagship gender program 50/50, with Nadir Tete to be followed by the second edition of our comprehensive news package in French and Fouché-vous at the top of the hour of 1 p.m. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, New Me FM 94.0, and Veritas Radio